At 0028 on May 17, 1943, Wing Commander Guy Gibson leveled his Lancaster bomber at exactly 60 feet above the Möhne Reservoir, watching the two spotlights on his aircraft converge into a single pool of light on the black water below. 24 years old, 173 combat missions, 0 experience dropping a 9,250-pound cylindrical mine that had to skip across water like a stone. The German defenders on the Möhne Dam had no idea what was coming. For 8 weeks, 617 Squadron had trained for this moment in total secrecy. Now Gibson was 800 yards from the dam wall, flying at 232 miles per hour, and his bomb aimer's finger was on the release button. One chance, one bomb. If the mine released too early, it would sink before reaching the dam. Too late, it would overshoot and detonate uselessly on the far shore. The margin for error was 0. Gibson had formed 617 Squadron exactly 8 weeks earlier, on March 21, 1943. The Air Ministry gave him a simple directive: recruit the best bomber crews in the RAF, train them to fly a mission nobody had attempted before, and destroy 3 dams in Germany's industrial heartland: the Möhne Dam, the Eder Dam, the Sorpe Dam. Together, they held back 330 million tons of water that powered the Ruhr Valley's steel factories, coal mines, and munitions plants. Destroying those dams would cripple German war production for months, maybe longer. Gibson was an obvious choice to lead the mission. At 24, he had already flown more combat missions than most pilots flew in their entire careers. He joined the RAF in 1936 at age 18, trained on fighters first, then transferred to bombers in 1939. By May 1943, he had completed 173 combat missions, 73 bombing missions over Germany in Hamptons and Manchesters and Lancasters, 99 night fighter missions in Bow fighters defending Britain during the Blitz, 1 tour as a bomber pilot, 1 tour as a night fighter pilot, now starting his 3rd tour. Gibson's crews respected him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. When 106 Squadron needed someone to test new bombing techniques over Germany, Gibson volunteered. When 106 Squadron needed someone to fly through the heaviest flak concentrations to mark targets for following bombers, Gibson flew the mission. He had been shot up, shot down, crash-landed, bailed out. He kept flying. The Air Ministry wanted Gibson to stop flying combat missions after his 2nd tour ended. They wanted him to train new crews, to pass on his knowledge. Gibson refused. He wanted command of a squadron. The Air Ministry offered him 617 Squadron instead, a special duties unit that did not yet exist. Gibson accepted immediately. The problem was simple. Conventional bombing could not destroy a concrete dam wall. The RAF had tried in 1940 and 1941. High-level bombers dropped thousands of pounds of explosives on German dams. Nothing happened. The bombs either bounced off the thick concrete or detonated too far from the structure to cause damage. Dam walls were designed to withstand enormous water pressure. A few tons of high explosive dropped from 15,000 feet was irrelevant. Barnes Wallis solved the problem. He was an aircraft designer at Vickers Armstrong, 55 years old, Cambridge-educated, responsible for designing the Wellington bomber's geodetic airframe. Wallis had been studying dam destruction since 1940. He understood that the weak point was not the top of the dam wall. It was the base where the wall met the reservoir floor. Water pressure increased with depth. A bomb detonating 30 feet underwater next to the dam wall would create a shock wave that traveled through the water and hammered the concrete with millions of pounds of force. The dam wall would crack from the inside. The cracks would widen. The reservoir would do the rest. The challenge was delivering the bomb to the target. A conventional bomb dropped from altitude would either skip across the water surface or penetrate too deep before detonating. Wallis needed the bomb to sink exactly 30 feet next to the dam wall, then detonate. His solution was revolutionary. Make the bomb cylindrical. Give it backspin. Drop it from low altitude at high speed. The spinning cylinder would skip across the water surface like a stone thrown across a pond. It would bounce 7 or 8 times, lose velocity with each bounce, then sink when it reached the dam wall. Hydrostatic pistols would detonate the bomb at exactly 30 feet depth. Wallis called it the upkeep mine. The RAF called it insane. The development had taken 2 years. Wallis first proposed the bouncing bomb concept in 1941. The Air Ministry rejected it. Too complicated, too risky, too expensive. Wallis persisted. He built scale models and tested them in his garden. He dropped marbles into water tanks and studied the splash patterns. He calculated shockwave propagation through water and concrete. He proved mathematically that an underwater explosion next to a dam wall would create forces that conventional bombs could never achieve. The Air Ministry remained skeptical until February 1943, when Wallis demonstrated a working prototype. He dropped a half-scale mine from a Wellington bomber into a reservoir. The mine bounced exactly as predicted. It sank next to a test wall and detonated at the correct depth. The underwater explosion was devastating. Concrete barriers shattered. The Air Ministry approved full-scale production. The upkeep mine weighed 9,250 pounds. It measured 60 inches in diameter and 50 inches long. The outer casing was mild steel. Inside was 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosive, more powerful than TNT. The mine had to be spun backwards at 500 revolutions per minute before release, using a hydraulic motor and belt drive mounted in the Lancaster's bomb bay. The aircraft had to fly at exactly 60 feet altitude, exactly 232 miles per hour, exactly perpendicular to the dam wall. Any deviation meant failure. The specifications were absolute, too high, and the mine would skip over the dam wall. Too low, and the mine would break apart on impact with the water. Too fast, and the mine would bounce too far. Too slow, and the mine would not skip at all. The margin for error was measured in feet and seconds. Testing revealed problems. Early prototypes broke apart when they hit water at high speed. The steel casing was not strong enough. Wallis redesigned the casing with thicker steel and internal bracing. More tests revealed that mines, with even slight weight imbalances, wobbled when spun at 500 revolutions per minute. A wobbling mine would not skip properly. Vickers had to manufacture each casing with extraordinary precision. Only 1 in 3 mines passed quality control. No bomber crew in the RAF had ever attacked a target at 60 feet altitude at night. Low-level bombing meant flying beneath German radar coverage, but it also meant flying through anti-aircraft fire with zero room for error. Hit a tree? Crash. Misjudge altitude? Crash. Get disoriented in darkness? Crash. The mathematics were brutal. Gibson recruited 21 crews for 617 squadron, 147 men total. Pilots, navigators, bomb aimers, flight engineers, wireless operators, gunners. He chose men with combat experience, men who had survived 30 or 40 missions over Germany. He wanted crews who could fly in formation at night, who could navigate by moonlight, who could handle a Lancaster bomber at the edge of its performance envelope. The training began in April 1943 at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. The crews practiced low-level flying over reservoirs in Wales and the English Midlands. They flew at 150 feet at first, then 100 feet, then 60 feet. The altimeter was useless below 100 feet. It could not measure altitude accurately enough. Gibson's flight engineer developed a solution. Mount 2 spotlights under the Lancaster, 1 in the nose, 1 in the belly. Angle them so they converged at exactly 60 feet. When the 2 light pools merged into one circle on the water, the aircraft was at the correct altitude. The first practice runs were disasters. Pilots misjudged altitude and flew into hillsides. Others descended too low and clipped trees with their tail sections. 3 practice aircraft were written off in the first 2 weeks. No fatalities, but the crashes proved how dangerous low-level flying was, even in daylight over familiar terrain. Night operations over Germany would be far worse. The crews practiced for 6 weeks. They flew every night the weather permitted. They learned to maintain exactly 60 feet altitude while flying at 232 miles per hour in total darkness. They learned to navigate by stopwatch and compass with no margin for error. They practiced bomb release procedures until the sequence became automatic. Start the upkeep spinning 10 minutes before the target. Check hydraulic pressure. Confirm rotation speed reaches 500 revolutions per minute. Maintain altitude. Maintain speed. Line up the wooden sight. Release on the bomb aimer's call. By early May, the crews could hit practice targets with 90% accuracy. They could fly the entire attack profile in their sleep. Gibson was satisfied. The squadron was ready. Navigation was the next problem. The Möhne Dam was 300 miles inside Germany. The route crossed the Dutch coast, skirted the Ruhr Valley's flak concentrations, then turned south toward the reservoir. Flying at 60 feet meant landmarks flashed past in seconds. Miss a turn, and the formation would arrive at the wrong target or run into hills they could not see in darkness. Gibson's navigator solved it. He marked every turn point on the route with precise timing. From the Dutch coast to the first checkpoint, 18 minutes at 180 miles per hour. From there to the second checkpoint, 12 minutes. The formation would navigate by stopwatch and compass, confirming position with visual landmarks when the moon was bright enough. Bomb aiming required a different innovation. Conventional bomb sights were designed for high-altitude bombing. They calculated trajectory based on altitude, speed, and wind drift. None of that applied to a mine skipping across water at 60 feet. The bomb aimer needed a simple way to judge distance to the dam wall. Gibson's bomb aimer created a wooden triangle with 2 nails and a piece of string. When the nails aligned with the towers on each end of the dam wall, the Lancaster was exactly 800 yards away. The correct release point. The upkeep mine itself was a nightmare. Each mine was handmade at a Vickers factory in Birmingham. Welding the cylindrical casing required absolute precision. Any imbalance would cause wobble when the mine spun at 500 revolutions per minute. A wobbling mine would not skip properly. Production was slow. By May 15th, Vickers had manufactured 56 upkeep mines. Only 19 were judged acceptable for combat use. Gibson's Lancaster ED 932/G received the call sign G. George. The aircraft was a standard Avro Lancaster Mark III with modifications. The bomb bay doors had been removed to accommodate the upkeep mine's diameter. Spotlights were mounted in the nose and belly. The hydraulic motor for spinning the mine was installed with a belt drive connecting to the mine's mounting cradle. The rear turret's lower guns were removed to save weight. Total crew, 7 men. Gibson as pilot. Flight Lieutenant John Hoppy Hopgood as deputy leader flying in Lancaster M. Mother. 19 Lancasters total assigned to the mission. If you want to see how Gibson's cylindrical mine performed when it hit the water at 232 miles per hour, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Gibson. The briefing for Operation Chastise took place at RAF Scampton on May 16th at 1800 hours. Gibson stood in front of a large map showing the route to the Möhne Dam. He explained the mission for the first time. 19 Lancasters would take off in 3 waves. The first wave, 9 aircraft led by Gibson, would attack the Möhne Dam. If the Möhne was breached, the remaining aircraft would proceed to the Eder Dam. The second wave, 5 aircraft, would attack the Sorpe Dam using a different approach. The third wave, 5 aircraft, would act as reserves. The crews studied reconnaissance photographs. The Möhne Dam stretched 2,100 feet across the valley. The dam wall was 130 feet tall and 112 feet thick at its base. 2 stone towers anchored each end. Anti-aircraft guns were positioned on the towers and along the dam wall. 8 20mm cannons, accurate up to 3,000 feet altitude. The Germans knew the dam was a target. They had installed anti-torpedo nets in the reservoir and barrage balloons above the valley. The defenses were formidable. Takeoff was scheduled for 21:39 hours. Gibson's aircraft lifted off first, followed by the rest of the first wave at 1-minute intervals. The Lancasters climbed to 1,200 feet, formed up over Scampton, then turned southeast toward the Dutch coast. The moon was 3/4 full. Visibility was excellent. Gibson could see the other Lancasters spread out in loose formation behind him. The flight to Germany took 90 minutes. The formation crossed the North Sea at 100 feet to avoid German radar. At the Dutch coast, they descended to 60 feet. Gibson's flight engineer called out obstacles. Power lines ahead, trees on the left, church steeple passing on the right. The Lancaster's 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines thundered at 2,650 revolutions per minute, maximum continuous power. The noise was deafening. At 00:15, the formation reached the first checkpoint, a distinctive bend in the Rhine River. Gibson turned south. The Möhne Reservoir was 15 minutes ahead. Behind him, the formation began to fracture. Lancaster M. Mother, flown by Hopgood, had been hit by flak over the Dutch coast. The aircraft was damaged but still flying. Lancaster E. Easy had been shot down near the German border. All 7 crew killed. The aircraft had flown into power lines at 60 feet altitude. The impact was catastrophic. Lancaster W. William had turned back with engine trouble. The first wave was down to 6 aircraft. The losses were expected. Intelligence had warned that German flak batteries along the route would be formidable. What surprised Gibson was how accurate the German gunners were. The flak crews had learned to track aircraft by sound. They heard the Lancasters coming and opened fire ahead of the approaching bombers. At 60 feet altitude, there was no room to evade. The Lancasters had to fly straight through the barrage. Lancaster P. Peter, flown by pilot officer Warner Otley, was hit by flak near the Möhne Reservoir. The starboard outer engine caught fire. Otley turned back toward England. He never made it. The Lancaster crashed in Holland. All 7 crew were killed. The first wave was now down to 5 aircraft. Gibson reached the Möhne Reservoir at 00:25. The water stretched black and flat under moonlight. He could see the dam wall ahead, a massive concrete barrier blocking the valley. The 2 stone towers were visible. Gibson circled the reservoir once, studying the defenses. The anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately. Tracer rounds arced across the darkness. 20mm shells exploded in clusters of orange light. The German gun crews had been expecting an attack. For weeks, reconnaissance aircraft had been photographing the Möhne Dam. The Germans knew something was coming. They did not know what or when, but they were ready. 8 20mm flak .38 cannons were positioned on the dam wall and in the towers. Each gun could fire 220 rounds per minute to an effective range of 7,200 feet. The guns were crewed by experienced gunners who had spent months practicing against low-flying targets. They knew the Lancasters would have to attack at low altitude to hit the dam wall. The Germans were waiting. What the German gunners did not know was that the Lancasters were not carrying conventional bombs. The Upkeep mine was classified top secret. British intelligence had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal its existence. Fake training documents described conventional bomb runs. False radio traffic suggested 617 Squadron was practicing for attacks on shipping. Even most of the Lancaster crews did not know what target they would attack until the final briefing on May 16th. Gibson radioed the formation. He would make the first attack run. The other aircraft would orbit the reservoir and attack in sequence after him. Gibson turned G. George toward the dam wall. His bomb aimer, Flight Lieutenant Frederick Spam Spafford, activated the upkeep mine's hydraulic motor. The 9,000-pound cylinder began spinning backwards at 500 revolutions per minute. The vibration shook the entire aircraft. Gibson descended to 60 feet. His flight engineer monitored the spotlights. The two pools of light were separate on the water surface. Gibson descended another 10 feet. The lights merged into one circle. Perfect altitude. His navigator called out speed, 225 miles per hour. Too slow. Gibson pushed the throttles forward. 232 miles per hour, correct speed. The dam wall filled the windscreen. Gibson could see the two towers clearly now. Spafford aligned his wooden triangle sight. The two nails lined up with the towers, 800 yards to target. The anti-aircraft guns concentrated their fire on G. George. Shells exploded around the aircraft. One burst shattered the cockpit side window. Glass fragments cut Gibson's face. He held course. Spafford's hand was on the release button. 700 yards, 600 yards. The Lancaster was racing toward the dam wall at 232 miles per hour. In 20 seconds, they would hit the concrete. Spafford waited. 500 yards. The wooden triangle showed the towers perfectly aligned. He pressed the button. The upkeep mine released from its cradle at exactly 0028 hours. The spinning cylinder dropped away from the Lancaster's belly. It hit the water surface 400 yards from the dam wall, traveling at 232 miles per hour. The mine bounced, rose 30 feet into the air, came down, bounced again. Each bounce carried it closer to the dam wall. Gibson pulled the Lancaster up hard. The bomber climbed over the dam wall with 50 feet of clearance. The anti-aircraft guns were still firing. Gibson banked right and looked back. The upkeep mine had bounced 7 times across the reservoir surface. It struck the dam wall and sank. Gibson counted 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. At 30 feet depth, the hydrostatic pistols triggered the detonators. 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosive detonated against the base of the dam wall. The underwater explosion created a shock wave that hammered the concrete with 10 million pounds of force per square inch. A column of water erupted 1,000 feet into the air. The shock wave was visible as a white dome expanding across the reservoir surface. Gibson circled and waited. The water column collapsed back into the reservoir. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a crack appeared in the dam wall, a vertical line running from the water line to the top of the concrete. Water began pouring through the crack. The pressure widened it. More water poured through. The crack spread left and right. Gibson radioed Scampton, "Goner," the code word meaning the mine had detonated, but the dam was still intact. He ordered the second aircraft to attack. Lancaster M. Mother, flown by Hopgood, began its attack run. Hopgood's aircraft was already damaged from the flak over Holland. The hydraulic system was compromised. The upkeep mine's spinning motor was not functioning properly. Hopgood descended to 60 feet anyway. The anti-aircraft guns concentrated on M. Mother. The German gunners had learned from Gibson's attack. They knew the Lancasters had to fly straight and level at 60 feet, perfect targets. A 20-millimeter shell hit M. Mother's port inner engine. The engine caught fire. Flames streamed back along the wing. Hopgood held course. His bomb aimer released the upkeep mine at 800 yards. The mine was spinning too slowly. It hit the water and bounced once, twice. Then it bounced over the dam wall and detonated in the valley beyond. The explosion destroyed a power station but did not damage the dam. Mem Mother climbed away, trailing fire. The port wing was burning. At 300 feet altitude, the wing structure failed. The Lancaster rolled inverted and crashed into trees north of the reservoir. Hopgood and 2 crew members died in the crash. The rear gunner and navigator escaped the wreckage. Both were captured. Gibson ordered the third aircraft to attack. Lancaster P. Peter, flown by Flight Lieutenant Harold Mick Martin, Martin was Australian, 24 years old, 40 combat missions. His navigator was Flight Lieutenant Jack Lego. His bomb aimer was Flight Lieutenant Robert Hay. Martin descended to 60 feet and accelerated to 232 miles per hour. The anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the darkness. Martin flew straight through the barrage. Hay released the upkeep mine at 800 yards. The mine bounced perfectly. 7 bounces. It struck the dam wall and sank. At 30 feet depth, it detonated. The second explosion was massive. Another water column erupted 1,000 feet high. The crack in the dam wall widened further. Water was pouring through in a solid sheet now, but the dam had not breached. Gibson ordered the 4th aircraft to attack, Lancaster A. Apple, flown by squadron leader Melvin "Dingy" Young. Young was Gibson's closest friend. They had flown together since 1940. Young was 27 years old, married, 48 combat missions. Young's attack run was perfect. Speed exactly 232 miles per hour. Altitude exactly 60 feet. Release point exactly 800 yards. The upkeep mine bounced 7 times and struck the dam wall. The explosion was the largest yet. The water column reached 1,200 feet. Gibson circled and watched. The crack in the dam wall was now 50 feet wide. Water was thundering through. The pressure was increasing. The concrete was failing. At 00:49 hours, 21 minutes after Gibson's first attack, the Möhne Dam breached. A 250-foot section of the dam wall collapsed. 330 million tons of water erupted through the gap. The reservoir emptied in less than an hour. A wall of water 30 feet high roared down the Möhne Valley at 15 miles per hour. The flood wave was visible from Gibson's aircraft. A massive surge of white water racing down the valley, destroying everything in its path. Trees were uprooted. Buildings disintegrated. Roads vanished beneath the torrent. The noise was audible, even over the Lancaster's 4 Merlin engines, a continuous roar like sustained thunder. The first victims were the German garrison at the dam. Barracks below the dam wall were swept away instantly. 68 soldiers drowned in the first 5 minutes. Their bodies were found miles downstream days later. The flood wave destroyed everything in its path. Power stations, railway bridges, factories, villages. At Neheim, 12 miles downstream, the water struck at 1100 hours. The town was asleep. No warning. The flood wave was 25 feet high when it hit. 300 buildings were destroyed in minutes. 400 people drowned. Most were asleep in their beds when the water came. At Wicked, 25 miles downstream, the flood wave arrived at 01:45 hours. A power station was obliterated. Railway bridges were swept away. The water was still 20 feet high. By the time the flood reached the Ruhr River 50 miles away at 02:30 hours, it had killed over 1,000 people. The death toll would eventually reach 1,600 people. Half were German civilians, half were foreign workers, and prisoners of war, forced to labor in the valley's factories. The economic damage was severe. 6 power stations destroyed, 25 bridges demolished, 125 factories flooded, agricultural land buried under tons of silt and debris. German engineers estimated the damage at over 100 million Reichsmarks. Production losses would continue for months. Gibson radioed Scampton. Nigger, the code word meaning the Möhne Dam, was destroyed. Then he ordered the remaining aircraft with upkeep mines to proceed to the Eder Dam. The Eder Dam was 40 miles southeast of the Möhne. The reservoir held 202 million tons of water. The dam wall was 140 feet tall. Unlike the Möhne, the Eder had no anti-aircraft defenses. The Germans believed the terrain made it impossible to attack. The dam sat in a narrow valley surrounded by 1,000-foot hills. Any aircraft approaching at 60 feet would have to descend through the hills, level off over the water, drop the mine, then climb out through the hills on the far side. In darkness, with zero margin for error. Gibson reached the Eder Dam at 01:35 hours. 5 Lancasters remained with upkeep mines. Gibson ordered them to orbit while he studied the approach. The valley was worse than intelligence photographs had suggested. The approach required descending through a saddle in the hills, turning hard, left over the reservoir, then lining up perpendicular to the dam wall. The entire maneuver had to be completed in less than 60 seconds. Gibson ordered Lancaster A. Apple, flown by Young, to make the first attempt. Young descended into the valley and turned toward the dam. He misjudged the turn angle. The Lancaster was not perpendicular to the dam wall. Young pulled up and aborted the attack. He circled and tried again. Second attempt, same problem. The turn was too tight. Third attempt, Young's bomb aimer got the alignment correct. Young descended to 60 feet, 232 miles per hour. The upkeep mine released at 800 yards. The mine bounced perfectly. It struck the dam wall and detonated at 30 feet depth. The explosion was massive, but the Eder Dam wall was thicker than the Möhne. The concrete cracked but did not breach. Gibson ordered the 5th aircraft to attack, Lancaster J. Johnny, flown by Flight Lieutenant David Maltby. Maltby was 23 years old, 32 combat missions. His attack run was flawless. The upkeep mine struck the dam wall and detonated. Another massive explosion. At 0154 hours, the Eder Dam breached. A 200-foot section of the dam wall collapsed. 202 million tons of water roared down the Eder Valley. The flood wave destroyed bridges, factories, and farmland for 50 miles downstream. Gibson radioed Scampton. Dinghy, the code word meaning the Eder Dam was destroyed. Then he ordered the remaining aircraft to return to base. The mission was complete. The flight back to England took 90 minutes. German night fighters were hunting the returning Lancasters. Flak batteries were alerted. Lancaster A. Apple was shot down over the Dutch coast. Young and his entire crew died in the crash. Lancaster J. Johnny was hit by flak, but made it back to Scampton with severe damage. Gibson landed at Scampton at 0415 hours on May 17th. 11 of the 19 Lancasters that had taken off returned. 8 aircraft were lost. 53 crew members were dead. 3 were prisoners of war. The cost was severe, but Operation Chastise was a success. The Möhne Dam and Eder Dam were destroyed. The Ruhr Valley's water supply was crippled. Reconnaissance photographs taken on May 17th showed the devastation. The Möhne Reservoir was empty. The valley below was flooded for miles. Factories were underwater. Railway lines were destroyed. Power stations were offline. German engineers estimated it would take 6 months to repair the damage. In reality, it took until September 1943 to restore the Möhne Dam to partial operation. Full repairs were not completed until after the war ended. The RAF claimed Operation Chastise had destroyed production capacity equivalent to 100,000 tons of steel. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, disputed this. He said the damage was severe, but German industry compensated by increasing production elsewhere. The true impact remains debated by historians. What is not debated is the tactical brilliance of the operation. No one had successfully attacked a dam before. Barnes Wallis's upkeep mine proved the concept worked. Low-level precision bombing could destroy targets that high-altitude bombing could not touch. Guy Gibson was promoted to group captain and awarded the Victoria Cross. He was 24 years old, the youngest group captain in the RAF. He was pulled from combat operations and sent on a publicity tour of the United States and Canada. The RAF needed him alive for morale purposes. Gibson hated it. He was a pilot, not a spokesman. In September 1944, Gibson convinced his superiors to let him return to combat operations. He flew as a master bomber, directing night raids over Germany. On September 19, 1944, Gibson took off from RAF Koningsby as controller for a raid on Reit and Mönchengladbach. After the raid, Gibson's aircraft, a de Havilland Mosquito, was returning to England when it crashed near Steenbergen in the Netherlands. Both Gibson and his navigator, Squadron leader James Warwick were killed. The exact cause of the crash remains unknown. Some evidence suggests mechanical failure. Some suggests Gibson's aircraft was hit by friendly fire from a British anti-aircraft battery. Gibson was 26 years old. He had flown 177 combat missions, more than any other bomber pilot in the RAF. Gibson is buried in Steenbergen Protestant Cemetery in the Netherlands. His Victoria Cross is displayed at the RAF Museum in London. The bar where 617 Squadron celebrated after the Dambusters raid still stands at RAF Scampton, though the base closed in 2022. 617 Squadron continued operations through the end of the war. The unit specialized in precision bombing using massive tallboy and Grand Slam bombs designed by Barnes Wallis. 617 Squadron destroyed the Tirpitz, the last German battleship, in November 1944 using 12,000-pound tallboy bombs. The squadron sank U-boat pens, destroyed railway viaducts, and bombed V-2 rocket sites. 617 Squadron was the most decorated bomber squadron in the RAF. The Upkeep mine was never used in combat again after Operation Chastise. The weapon was too specialized, too difficult to manufacture, too dangerous to employ. Only one Upkeep mine survives today, displayed at the RAF Museum in Hendon. The mine is inert, the explosive removed, but the cylindrical casing and spinning mechanism remain intact. Barnes Wallis continued designing weapons after the war. He developed the swing-wing concept that influenced modern variable geometry aircraft. He worked on supersonic aircraft designs. He received a knighthood in 1968. Wallis died in 1979 at the age of 92. He is buried in Effingham, Surrey. His epitaph reads, "He gave his life to science and to his country." The Möhne Dam was rebuilt by the German government between 1943 and 1945. The new dam wall was stronger than the original, with reinforced concrete and improved drainage systems. The reservoir was refilled in 1946. Today, the Möhne Dam is a tourist attraction. A museum at the site displays photographs of the 1943 raid and the subsequent reconstruction. The Etter Dam was also rebuilt after the war. The new dam wall was completed in 1947. The reservoir was refilled in 1948. Like the Möhne, the Etter Dam is now a tourist destination. Visitors can walk across the dam wall and see the memorial to the civilians killed in the 1943 flood. Operation Chastise remains one of the most famous air raids of World War II. The mission demonstrated that precision bombing could destroy strategic targets that conventional bombing could not touch. It proved that innovation and training could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. It showed that a small group of highly skilled crews could achieve results that entire bomber fleets could not. But the cost was severe. 53 men died to destroy 2 dams. Some historians argue the results did not justify the casualties. Others argue the psychological impact on German morale and the demonstration of RAF capabilities made the mission worthwhile. The debate continues. What is not debatable is the courage of the men who flew Operation Chastise. Flying at 60 feet altitude through anti-aircraft fire in total darkness required extraordinary skill and nerves. Every crew knew the odds. They flew anyway. Guy Gibson, 24 years old, led from the front. He attacked first. He drew German fire so other crews could attack more safely. He circled the reservoirs, coordinating attacks while shells exploded around him. He flew 177 combat missions before his death at 26. No memorial can adequately honor what he and his generation did, but we can try. We can remember their names. We can tell their stories. We can make sure they do not disappear into silence. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who destroyed dams with spinning mines. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Guy Gibson doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.